Something is wrong with the way history has been told. What if the world you trust was never meant to reveal the truth? Behind every empire, every collapse, every global shift, there are patterns that refuse to disappear. Not coincidence, not accident, but a hidden architecture of influence, operating silently across centuries, from the divided rule of Pharaoh to the layered systems of modern power, to the final deception foretold in Islam. Each era reflects the same unsettling reality. Control is most effective when it is unseen. But here's the disturbing part. What if this influence is not only political, but psychological, even spiritual? What if the greatest deception is not forcing you to believe a lie, but making you certain that you already understand the truth? And when the final trial arrives, will you recognize it, or will it feel familiar? At Nox Obscura, history is not simply told. It is unveiled, dissected, and brought into the light where shadows lose their certainty. The hidden hand. What if the world you trust is only a carefully constructed illusion? What if the leaders you see, presidents, kings, officials, are not the true holders of power, but merely the visible layer of something far deeper, far older, and far more hidden? Because history has always had two faces, one that is written and one that is concealed. From the rise of empires to the fall of nations, humanity has been told a version of events, clean, structured, and controlled. But beneath that version, there are whispers, patterns, fragments of something that doesn't quite fit, a shadow that follows power, but is never seen directly. In modern times, people call this the deep state, a hidden network of influence operating beyond elections, beyond governments, beyond public accountability, a system that remains even when everything else changes. But what if this idea is not new? What if it has always existed? And what if it was already warned about long before modern civilization even began? In the Qur'an, Allah reveals a reality that many overlook. They plan and Allah plans, and Allah is the best of planners. Surah Al-Imran 354. This is not just a statement about a single event, it is a principle, a law of history, that behind every visible action, there are unseen intentions. Behind every decision, there are hidden strategies. Sheikh Ibn Kathir, in his tafsir, explains that this verse reflects how human schemes, no matter how secret, are always part of a larger, unseen framework of planning, a reality where not everything unfolds as it appears. And that is where the unease begins. Because if planning exists in layers, then what layer are we actually seeing? Throughout history, powerful figures have always relied on inner circles, trusted advisors, secret councils, individuals who operate beyond public awareness. This was true in ancient courts, and it remains true in modern systems. But Islam does not stop at political explanation. It introduces something far more unsettling, a hidden influence that does not rely on position or visibility. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "Indeed, shaitan flows through the son of Adam like blood." Hadith, Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. This is not metaphor alone. Shaykh an-Nawawi, in his commentary on Sahih Muslim, explains that this hadith points to the subtlety of influence, how deception can move silently, undetected, shaping thoughts, emotions, and decisions without being recognized, not through force, but through suggestion, through normalization, through time, and suddenly, what once felt strange becomes accepted. What once felt wrong becomes ordinary. This is how control evolves, not by chains, but by perception. If people can be guided in what they believe, then their actions no longer need to be controlled. They will move exactly as expected. And this is where the question becomes darker. Because when narratives are repeated long enough, they stop being questioned. They become reality. And when reality itself is shaped, then truth becomes something fragile, something distant, something almost impossible to recognize. So ask yourself this: if a system existed that could influence belief without being seen, shape decisions without being known, and guide entire societies without ever revealing itself, would you even notice it, or would you defend it, thinking it was your own understanding? Because the most dangerous form of control is the one that feels like freedom, and the most dangerous deception is the one that never reveals its face. Allah reminds us again, Allah is predominant over his affair, but most of the people do not know. Surah Yusuf at 12:21, a verse that echoes with a chilling implication, that beyond all systems, beyond all hidden powers, there is still a greater control. But most people never realize what is truly happening around them. So the question is no longer whether hidden power exists. The question is far more disturbing. If it has always been there, watching, influencing, shaping, then how much of what you believe was ever truly yours? Roots of control. If hidden influence exists today, then its origins are not modern. They are ancient, woven into the earliest structures of civilization. Long before intelligence agencies and global institutions, power was already concentrated in select circles. Not merely rulers, but those who stood behind them, advisors, priests, strategists, figures who rarely appeared in official records, yet shaped decisions that altered entire civilizations. Ancient Egypt offers a striking example. The Qur'an does not present Pharaoh as an isolated tyrant. Instead, it describes a structured system of authority. Indeed, Pharaoh exalted himself in the land and made its people into factions. Surah Al-Qasas 28:4. This fragmentation was not accidental, it was calculated, a method of governance designed to weaken unity while strengthening control. Sheikh at-Tabari, in his tafsir, emphasizes that Pharaoh's rule depended not only on force, but on engineered division, separating communities, controlling perception, and ensuring that opposition could never consolidate. This reveals a critical pattern. Power does not sustain itself through strength alone, but through design, and that design often remains hidden. Beyond Egypt, similar structures emerge in other empires. In Mesopotamia and later Rome, influence extended beyond kings and emperors. Religious authorities, financial elites, and inner councils operated within layers of secrecy. Their decisions were rarely documented openly, yet their impact was undeniable. What unites these civilizations is not geography, but method. A recurring architecture of control, centralized authority, restricted knowledge, managed belief, and perhaps most importantly, continuity. Because while rulers changed, the underlying systems often remained intact. This continuity raises a difficult question. Is power truly transferred or merely reassigned within the same structure? Islamic scholarship approaches this question with a broader lens. It does not reduce history to political movements alone. Instead, it connects worldly systems to a deeper dimension, one that transcends generations. The Qur'an repeatedly references the persistence of certain patterns among those who hold influence. And thus we have made for every prophet an enemy. Devils from mankind and jinn, inspiring to one another decorative speech in deception. Surah Al-An'am 6:112. This verse introduces a layered understanding of opposition and influence. Not isolated individuals, but networks, visible and unseen, collaborating through persuasion rather than force. Shaykh Ibn Kathir explains that this inspiration refers to the transmission of ideas that appear convincing yet carry distortion beneath their surface. A process that does not rely on direct coercion, but on intellectual and cultural influence. Over time, such influence becomes embedded within societies. It shapes education, it defines norms, it determines what is accepted and what is rejected. Gradually, the system no longer needs to assert itself. It becomes self-sustaining. This is where historical analysis converges with a more unsettling realization. That control, when perfected, becomes invisible. Because once belief systems are aligned with a particular structure, resistance diminishes without confrontation. People defend what they have been conditioned to accept, and anything outside that framework appears irrational or even threatening. This phenomenon is not confined to a single era. It repeats, subtly adapting to each generation while preserving its core function, a continuity not of rulers, but of influence. Yet despite this complexity, Islamic teachings maintain a critical boundary. No system, regardless of its depth or reach, operates independently of divine will. Indeed, your Lord is subtle in what he wills. Surah Yusuf and 12:100. Sheikh as-Sadi interprets this subtlety as a form of divine governance that unfolds beyond human perception, where events appear ordinary, yet are directed with precision beyond comprehension. This introduces a paradox. While hidden structures may exist within history, they themselves are not ultimate. They are part of a larger unfolding, one that no human design can fully control. And still, the pattern remains. Empires rise with similar foundations. Power concentrates in familiar ways. Influence persists beyond visible transitions, which leads to a question that history alone cannot answer. If these structures have endured across centuries, evolving, adapting, surviving, then are we witnessing independent systems or fragments of something far more continuous and far more deliberate, operating beneath the surface of time itself? Architecture of influence. In the modern era, power rarely presents itself in overt forms. It operates through structures, complex, interdependent, and often opaque. Unlike earlier civilizations, authority today is not confined to monarchs or singular regimes. It is distributed across institutions, political bodies, financial systems, intelligence networks, and global organizations. Each appears distinct, yet they intersect in ways that are not always visible. This diffusion creates an illusion of decentralization. But beneath that appearance, patterns begin to emerge. Decisions of global consequence, economic shifts, policy alignments, strategic conflicts often follow trajectories that seem coordinated beyond coincidence. Not identical, but aligned. Not declared, yet consistent. This has led many analysts to propose the existence of embedded influence within institutional frameworks. Not necessarily a unified command, but a convergence of interests among individuals who occupy critical positions across multiple sectors. Influence in this context does not require visibility. It requires access. Access to information before it becomes public. Access to decision-making channels before outcomes are finalized. Access to narratives before they are disseminated. Once these points are secured, direction can be applied subtly, without announcement, without attribution. From an Islamic perspective, this phenomenon aligns with a broader understanding of how influence manifests. It is rarely imposed abruptly. It develops through gradual alignment of thought, of language, of expectation. The Qur'an describes this progression with precision, and do not mix the truth with falsehood or conceal the truth while you know it. Surah Al-Baqarah 242. This verse does not depict outright denial. It identifies something more nuanced, the blending of clarity with distortion, a method where truth is not erased, but diluted, combined with elements that alter its meaning. Shaykh al-Qurtubi, in his tafsir, notes that such mixing creates confusion rather than rejection. People are not confronted with falsehood directly. They are guided toward interpretations that appear reasonable, yet gradually deviate from accuracy. Within modern systems, this mechanism becomes particularly effective. Information is no longer scarce, it is abundant. Yet abundance does not guarantee clarity. When multiple narratives coexist, each supported by selective evidence, the ability to discern becomes increasingly difficult. Certainty weakens, doubt expands. And in that uncertainty, influence finds its space, not by dictating conclusions, but by shaping the boundaries of what can be considered. This is the architecture of influence. It does not demand agreement. It defines the framework within which disagreement occurs. Over time, this framework stabilizes. It determines which perspectives are amplified and which are marginalized. Not always through force, but through repetition, credibility, and institutional endorsement. The result is a form of guidance that feels organic, yet its direction is rarely accidental. Islamic teachings further emphasize that such processes are not confined to human interaction alone. They intersect with a dimension that operates beyond direct observation. The Qur'an states, "Indeed, he sees you, he and his tribe, from where you do not see them." Surah Al-Araf 7:27. This verse refers to Shaitan and his domain, highlighting an asymmetry of perception. Influence may originate from sources that remain unseen, while its effects appear entirely natural. Shaykh ibn Kathir explains that this unseen observation allows for strategic suggestion. placing ideas, amplifying inclinations, and reinforcing patterns without overt interference. When combined with structured systems of communication and authority, the impact becomes more profound. Because external frameworks provide the channels, and unseen influence provides the momentum. Together, they create a continuity of direction that is difficult to trace back to a single origin. This does not imply a singular controlling entity. It suggests alignment across layers that reinforce one another: institutional, cultural, psychological. Each layer operates within its own logic, yet contributes to a broader outcome. And still, the process remains largely undetected, not because it is concealed entirely, but because it does not appear as control. It appears as consensus, as normal progression, as the natural course of events. Which raises a critical question: if influence can shape perception without revealing itself, and if systems can guide outcomes without explicit coordination, then at what point does structure become direction, and direction becomes something far more intentional than it appears? The final deception: if patterns of influence persist across history, then their culmination is not random. It moves toward an endpoint, one that Islamic tradition describes with striking clarity, not merely as a political shift, but as a transformation of perception itself. In the final phase of human history, Islamic eschatology introduces a figure whose emergence represents the peak of deception: Al-Masih ad-Dajjal. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "There has never been a trial greater than the Dajjal." Hadith, Sahih Muslim. This statement is precise. It does not describe a conflict of armies or territories, but a fitna, a trial that tests perception, belief, and certainty at the deepest level. Sheikh an-Nawawi explains that the magnitude of this trial lies in its ability to blur distinctions between truth and falsehood. What appears evident becomes uncertain, and what is false presents itself with convincing authority. This is not deception in its primitive form. It is refined, structured, comprehensive. The narrations describe capabilities that challenge ordinary understanding: control over resources, manipulation of environment, and displays that resemble miracles. Yet these are not divine. They are tests, permitted within defined limits. The Qur'an provides a principle that frames this phenomenon. Say, shall we inform you of the greatest losers as to their deeds? Those whose effort is lost in worldly life while they think that they are doing well in work? Surah Al-Kahf 18:103-104. This passage highlights a profound dimension of misguidance: the conviction of correctness while being in error, a state where perception is not merely influenced, but inverted. Sheikh Ibn Kathir interprets these verses as a warning against self-assured deviation. When individuals no longer question the validity of their understanding because it aligns with what they have come to accept. Within the context of the final trial, this condition becomes universal. Deception no longer requires concealment. It operates openly, yet remains unrecognized. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ instructed the believers to recite the opening verses of Surah Al-Kahf as protection. Hadith, Sahih Muslim. Shaykh scholars have noted that this surah repeatedly addresses themes of illusion: wealth mistaken for permanence, knowledge mistaken for completeness, and power mistaken for autonomy. Each narrative within it dismantles a different form of misplaced certainty. This is not incidental. It prepares the mind to question appearances, to recognize limits, and to remain anchored in principles that do not shift with circumstance. Because the final deception is not sustained by force, it is sustained by acceptance. When a system aligns with expectation, when narratives confirm existing assumptions, when perception feels coherent, resistance diminishes without confrontation. At that point, influence no longer needs to persuade, it simply continues. Yet Islamic teaching establishes a definitive boundary that cannot be crossed. Indeed, Allah is gentle and subtle with His servants. Surah Ash-Shura 42:19. Sheikh As-Sadi explains that this subtlety reflects a form of governance beyond human calculation, where events unfold through means that remain partially concealed, yet ultimately serve a precise outcome. No structure, regardless of its complexity, operates outside this domain. No influence, regardless of its reach, escapes limitation. This introduces a critical distinction. While deception may expand, it is never absolute. While systems may evolve, they are never independent. And while the final trial may reach unprecedented intensity, it is also temporary. Its purpose is not to establish permanence, but to reveal alignment between conviction and truth, between perception and reality. And in that moment, the question is no longer about hidden networks or historical patterns. It becomes entirely personal. What do you trust when appearances can no longer be relied upon? What remains when certainty itself is tested? Because when the final layer of deception unfolds, it will not announce itself. It will feel familiar. And that familiarity will be its greatest strength. So as history continues to unfold, quietly, precisely, beyond complete human comprehension, one reality remains. Not everything that shapes the world is visible. Not everything that is visible is accurate. And not every influence reveals its origin. The task, then, is not merely to observe events, but to understand them within a framework that does not shift with time. A framework rooted in revelation, preserved through scholarship, and tested across generations. If you seek to explore that history, its hidden layers, its overlooked patterns, and its deeper meanings, then continue this journey with Nox Obscura. Because some histories are written in books, and others are waiting to be uncovered.